Good evening, viewers. Welcome once again to Joe Mwai's channel, a channel whose aim is to focus upon the aspect of our reality that we have not commonly been taught about, or which is not commonly taught to us since our childhood. And this is the reality of that which cannot be conceptualized with the five common or corporeal sense. An aspect of being that is believed to originate all the principles of what we see, because what we see are not principles, but they are results. They are effects of causes. There is what causes them. So what causes them is what we are interested in, and that is what I want us to talk about. When we understand ourselves not as human beings but as intelligent beings, then we come to a vital realization, or we start to awaken to a vital realization of who we really are, not as mortal beings, but as immortal beings, as beings that have no beginning or have no end, as beings that are in the likeness of that which has no beginning or has no end. And when I talk about that which has no beginning or no end, I'm talking about intelligence, because intelligence has no beginning, intelligence has no end. There is not a time that there was no intelligence, and there will not be a time that there will not be intelligence. And as a result of that, intelligence is primal, intelligence is causal, intelligence is immortal, intelligence is incorporeal. And based on the incorporeality of intelligence and the eternity of intelligence, intelligence must be infinite as well. But then when we bring in the aspect of infinity, it brings along with it a lot of complexities. Complexities on the basis that we are talking of infinite. And if we talk of infinite, then it means that that which we are terming or perceiving as infinite must occupy everything in every way. And if we assume that intelligence has no beginning or has no end, and that it is infinite, then it would imply that that intelligence occupies everything. And that would also mean that everything else is a part of that intelligence, and therefore it is in the nature of that intelligence. And one of the qualities that would come with that is the infinitude of everything else that is in the likeness of intelligence. But when we look at the material sense of reality, which is everything the opposite of intelligence, then we are faced with one of the major challenges that our minds can think of. And that then brings a question, or poses a question on whether there is hope that we are able to solve this problem of the infinity or infiniteness of intelligence in the presence of a material sense of reality, a reality that is everything the opposite of intelligence. And in order for you to understand what I'm trying to say, especially those of you who are religiously inclined, I would like, from a Christian perspective, to break down the meaning of intelligence in order for us to be able to sail together. From a metaphysical perspective, intelligence is, again, as I said, infinite. Is the only reality in the truth of existence. In fact, intelligence is existence. There is no existence without intelligence, and there is no intelligence without existence. And that intelligence is the reality of existence. And therefore, there cannot be reality without intelligence in existence. And that will tend to form a web whereby there cannot be reality without intelligence, and there cannot be intelligence without existence, and in equal measure there cannot be existence without intelligence, and there cannot be intelligence without reality. But what does that mean? Is that the truth of existence? Is that the truth in the reality of existence? In order for us to determine and understand the truth of our existence, we come into play. And that is where you and I come into play, not as human beings, but as intelligent beings, on the basis that since intelligence itself is existence, then the only way to understand that is by understanding ourselves as intelligence, because you and I has intelligence, and your intelligence and my intelligence is not a part of the body. It's not a part of that which dies, but it is a part of that has no beginning or that has no end. Although, and that is a topic for another day, your intelligence and my intelligence has been held captive by a shell that purports to house it in what we call our body. And Paul, those of you who are biblically inclined, in the book of Romans, explained what that those members of the bodies are, or the constitution of the body as that which is composed of its members. And the members of the body, we know very well, they are the five common sense. So the sense of sight, the sense of sound, the sense of touch, the sense of odor, the sense of smell. All those five senses comprises the body. And that's why Paul would call them the members of the body. The amazing thing with Paul is that he was so metaphysically inclined that at the beginning he wanted to conquer the members of the body and do that was according to his spirituality, only to come to an understanding or a finding that there are two laws in place. One being the law of the spirit, which is the law of the mind, which is now the law of intelligence, and the other one being a law that serves the members of the body. But the amazing discovery that Paul came about was that the law that serves the members of the body, or the members of the body with a law that is separate from the law of the spirit, wages war against the law of the spirit, and that means that the two are at loggerheads. And if they are at loggerheads, then it brings another problem. How can they be of the same nature or from the same source? The spirit and the material, or the matter. And that again is another story for another day, but it is in line with our teachings. So tonight I want us to focus more upon the aspect of intelligence, on the basis that intelligence is existence, and that existence is the truth of reality. And that truth of reality is you and I, because only I can say I am, I live, I exist, I am real. The I within me is real. That I in me is not a part of the body, but it is the inner aspect of my being, the intelligence part of me, the inner man part of me, or the spiritual aspect of my being. And that I is the one that is connected with the source, and it is in the likeness of now the intelligence that I'm talking about, that constitutes or consists of the reality of existence. That aspect of intelligence, as I have said at the beginning of this video, has no beginning, my apologies, and has no end. That which has no beginning or no end is eternal. That equally, that has no beginning and has no end, must be infinite, because infinity implies without a beginning, without an end. That which is infinite must occupy every conceivable infinitesimal point to infinity, without giving room for anything else to exist. And what that implies is that if we metaphorically take this room to represent infinity, and then a scientist come and tell you that this room is filled with only particles of, say, H2 or oxygen, for example. And because this room represents infinity, it implies that in the infinitude of this room, there is no other particle element apart from the particle of oxygen to infinity, which would imply that the oxygen in this room is infinite. It is uncountable. It is without a beginning. It is without an end. And it occupies every infinitesimal point or space that is conceivable, no matter how small, to infinity. But if another scientist comes to the same room with much more advanced microscopic equipment and veer into the infinitude of this room and come up with a conclusion of his experiment or his findings that there was one particle that was not a particle of oxygen in this infinite room. So it implies that in the infinity of this room, there is a point occupied, no matter how minimal, how infinitesimal, how minimal that point is, in the realm, in the infinite realm of this room filled with oxygen, there is a point or a position or a place or a space not occupied by oxygen but by an element of carbon, be it one particle that is so minute it cannot be seen by the naked eye, but it is there. That finding nullifies the infinitude of oxygen in this infinite room that previously we thought was filled with nothing else than oxygen. And therefore, from that point, we can no longer say that this room is infinitely filled with oxygen. So that element nullifies the infinitude of the occupation of oxygen in this infinite room. Equally, intelligence, if intelligence is eternal, is infinite, is without a beginning, without an end, then all space, all dimension of any consciousness of intelligence or the infinite intelligence must not be filled by anything else, or must not occupy anything else apart from intelligence, which implies that that wall behind you, which is made up of a stone, the stone would be in the same nature as the everything else, the intelligence that occupies everything in every way. And this understanding deals with the aspect of the infinitude of intelligence versus the existence of a material universe. because material universe is permeated with other objects that are not of a spiritual nature, that are not of an intelligence nature. And what that means is that the material universe is opposite, is not in the likeness of the infinite universe of intelligence, as it were. So, if that is the case, then the aspect of a material universe, and remember, no matter how big, even if the universe from where we stand is so huge that light takes 94 billion years to traverse across. And when we're talking about light taking 94 billion years, we are talking of the time that light traveling at 300,000 kilometers a second would take to traverse across. So no matter how huge that universe is, if we compare it to an infinite universe, this universe that we perceive as so huge is minutely small, almost implausible compared to that which is infinite. But nevertheless, just like we have talked about oxygen infinitely filling this infinite room, or metaphorical infinite room, if there was another particle of carbon, it nullifies the infinitude of oxygen in this infinite room. If the material sense of reality exists in the light of an infinite universal intelligence, then that nullifies the infinitude of the infinite universal intelligence. If that is the case, it also implies that the infinite universal intelligence must not be infinite. If it is not infinite, and which infinitude is curtailed by the existence of a material sense of reality that is everything the opposite of this infinite universe, then that kind of infinite universal intelligence cannot be infinite, or can no longer be perceived as infinite. If it cannot be perceived as infinite, it equally cannot be perceived as eternal. If it cannot be perceived as eternal, it equally cannot be perceived as immortal or incorporeal. But how do we sort of come out of that quagmire? How do we unravel that quagmire? How do we unravel that mystery? There is a way, and the way is similar to the way or the route that was taken by one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century in the name Albert Einstein, whereby in coming to the discovery of the special relativity theory, he remembered of a comic book that he had read at the age of 12, and he remembered this at the age of 16, as the story goes, where the character in the comic book was racing after the speed of light. And what Einstein then did was to take the place of the character in the comic book racing after the speed of light, and he saw himself racing after the speed of light, only to realize that no matter how fast he ran after the speed of light, even if he actually ran at 99.99% the speed of light, and we know that light travels at 300,000 kilometers a second. And in order for us to understand how fast such a speed is, we need to understand that the Earth around the equator is 25,000 kilometers. And therefore, a speeding light would go round the equator 12 times in 1 second. 1 second is the blink of your eye. So at the blink of your eye, light has gone round the equator, or round the earth, round the equator 12 times. That is how fast light travels. So traveling at 99.9% the speed of light, one would think that you would get very close and you would actually almost catch the speeding light. But Einstein discovered that even if you are traveling at that speed of 99.99% the speed of light, light will be receding to you or receding away from you as if you are stationary, as if you are not moving at all. But that was not all. Einstein did something different. He now saw himself through his mind sitting on one of the wavy particles, or one of the particles that form the wavy light, a photon. And he realized that when he is riding on this photon, a photon, the particle that forms the light, everything else, including time, a second, the blink of the eye, is frozen. So you will not be blinking your eye. Your eye, if it's blinked, it will be blinked forever in the wake of a receding light. If it is unblinked, then it will stay that way. It will be frozen in time in the wake of a receding light. And that is how Einstein came to the greatest discovery of the 20th century in the theory of the special relativity, or the special relativity theory, and the constancy of the speed of light. So equally, in order for us to eliminate the problem of the infinitude of existence in the truth of, or reality in the truth of existence, which is intelligence, the infinitude of intelligence, we would have to see ourselves in the realm of intelligence, a realm which is infinite. When we are in the realm of the infinite intelligence, the material sense of reality disappears, dissipates into nothingness, is obliterated into nothingness. Because when you are in the realm of the infinite, and remember, this is the infinite universal intelligence of the absolute being. Being which is absolute. Being which is without a beginning, without an end. Being which is eternal, which is immortal, which is incorporeal, which is infallible, which is indubitable, which is ineffable. That aspect of being, which is what is commonly regarded as God from a religious perspective, its intelligence, which, as we have seen, occupies everything in every way, we are a part of it. And that's why a lot of religions will tell you that you are sons of God. and especially from a Christian perspective, where we find in the book of Genesis, at the beginning of or the exegesis of the Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, that the Creator is saying, let us make man in our likeness and in our image, and thus man became a living being. So that aspect of man as a spiritual living being in the initial creation, because we find two types of creation in Genesis, check it, second chapter of Genesis. The first aspect, let us make man in our likeness and in our image, and thus man became a living being, not a human being, a living being, is the aspect that is in application in this particular case. So that aspect of man becoming a living being as a result of a thought by the infinite universal intelligence, or the absolute being, gives credit or the credibility of the nature of man to that of its maker, because in the likeness of your maker. So if your maker is the infinite universal intelligence, or the absolute being with its infinite universal intelligence, then it means that you are an absolute being, you are an intelligent being, you have all the qualities, all the characteristics, and all the attributes of your source, of the infinite universal intelligence, of the eternal absolute being. And that is similar to a drop of water from the ocean. If we go to the ocean, and I live very close to the Channel Seas of England, if I go to the beach and I take a drop of water from the infinite ocean, I will find that if I measured the contents of this drop of water, it will have everything that the ocean has in qualities. So if 5% of this drop of water contains salt, the infinite ocean, or 5% of the infinite ocean, will contain salt. Anything else that is in this drop of water, or in that infinite ocean, will be in this drop of water. So the difference will not be in the quality between the drop of water and the infinite ocean. The only difference will be of that degree, of degree. That whereas this is just a mere drop of water, the ocean is infinitely huge. But if we go ahead, and if I go ahead, or I went ahead and returned that drop of water into the infinite ocean, I can no longer say that that drop of water is in this particular place where I dropped it into the water. It forms a part of the whole sea, or the whole ocean. And that is how we are, made in the likeness of the infinite universal intelligence, as found in the book of Genesis. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, in our image. In the likeness of God is in the qualities, characteristics, and attributes. In the image of God is in the idea. And the idea of God is the infinite universal intelligence of God. So the ideas of God are infinite. That is the intelligence of God. And that is the intelligence that occupies everything in every way. And this intelligence of God is what religions, and especially Christians, regard as the spirituality of God, the Spirit of God. The Bible tells us that the Spirit of God occupies everything in every way. And The Bible equally tells us that God occupies everything in every way. He's omnipresent. He's the source of all power. He's omnipotent. He is the source of all knowledge. He's all-knowing. He's omniscient. And therefore, omni, which means all presence, all power, all science, all knowingness, then implies infinitude. The infinitude of presence, the infinitude of power, the infinitude of knowingness. But in order for us to sieve and come to the real McCoy, let us understand those three aspects of God, or attributes of God, whereby we start with the all-presence, omnipresence. And the question is, what is omnipresence without anything, without power and without knowingness? Omnipresence without power and intelligence is a vacuum. And scientists talks about such a vacuum, a true vacuum, an absolute vacuum with nothing in it, nothing at all, vacuum. So such a vacuum is pointless, is useless, without power, without knowingness. And therefore, the omnipresence of God, without his power and without his knowingness, is nothing. But if we add the power of God, the omnipotence of such a God, in his omnipresence, we get something. But what is power without knowingness? A very good example, as I have cited in one of my videos, is light, electricity. Right now, I'm surrounded by electricity that has lit this room. But I must apply something in order for me to benefit from the light. Otherwise, I'll be in total darkness if I did not apply that something. And that something is my intelligence. The intelligence to know that I need to switch on or to press the switch, to turn on the switch in order for the bulb to light, in order for the light to permeate this entire room. And therefore, if we put a chimpanzee, which is the primate with the closest DNA and brain to that of man, at 98% similarity, with only 2% difference being our mind, the chimpanzee will not know that it can switch on the light. But I have intelligence, I know that. So unless, obviously, it is taught, and even if it's taught, it will learn through instinct, or the level of intelligence is very low. But I know that, and I will switch it on, and I will light. I will know how to use, to apply a lot of gadgets, a lot of technical equipments by connecting them to the light. And that's the difference. So, all presence of all power without knowingness, again, it is pointless. It's like an atomic bomb without somebody to switch on the button to either nuclear power to light the world or to bomb and annihilate the world. It needs that intelligence. And therefore, we can say without a doubt or without any fear that it is the intelligence of God that obtains all power and that occupies everything in every way. That aspect of knowingness of God is the intelligence that I'm talking about. It is the intelligence that is universal. And that absolute being is what is regarded as God. And since that intelligence is universal and occupies everything in every way, and we are made in its likeness, and the proof for that is that we are intelligent beings, then it means that through our intelligence there is a way that we are able, like Albert Einstein did with the theory of special relativity, by seeing himself riding on a photon of light, in order to understand that everything is frozen in the wake of a receding time. We can equally awaken in our mind or see ourselves in the realm of the infinite universal intelligence, in order to understand that from that perspective, and because of the infinitude of that universal intelligence, anything that is the opposite of that infinite universal intelligence of the absolute being is annihilated, in order for that intelligence to maintain its omnipresence, its infinitude, its in eternity. That is possible, but that is not only that is possible, but it takes us to another realm of understanding, that if that be the case, when we are in the infinite realm of the universal intelligence, everything, the material sense of reality, is obliterated, annihilated. It is sent to oblivion. It becomes unreal because of the reality of that which is infinite. Then it implies that this infinite universal intelligence occupies all dimensions of consciousness, apart from one dimension. And that dimension that it does not occupy is the dimension of illusion, dream state. It does not occupy a dream state, an illusion of being, because of its infinite realm of reality. There is no other room for it to perceive, to conceptualize that is not occupied by its infinitude existence. And therefore, that aspect of knowingness, that aspect of intelligence, has no conceptualization of anything that is its opposite. And today, if you take a piece of paper, and within that piece of paper, you divide it into two, and on one side you write matter, and on the other side you write spirit, and you write the qualities, characteristics, and attributes of spirit. They will be everything the opposite of matter. Whereas spirit is infinite, matter is finite. Whereas spirit is immortal, matter is mortal. Whereas spirit is eternal, matter is temporal. Whereas spirit is immortal, matter is mortal. Whereas spirit is intelligence, matter has no intelligence. So everything the opposite. There are two opposites. But when we understand that, then we come to the vital understanding that constitutes the doctrine of metaphysics. And that vital realization is the realization that we are only conscious of this material sense of reality because our mind, our intelligence, has separated from the infinite universal intelligence of its source. And therefore, it is no longer within that realm of infinite consciousness, which constitutes of the highest dimension of consciousness, which is what is literally regarded as heaven, a metaphor. And then now, this mind, having fallen, having separated, it has gone down to the lowest dimension of consciousness. And that lowest dimension of consciousness is where now the fall of man, from the metaphor of the fall from the Garden of Eden, takes place, where we find ourselves in this realm of a material sense of reality. Now, that is a mind in error. And as a result of our mind being in error to a point where we now conceptualize of a reality that is the opposite of that which is infinite, eternal, immortal, infinitely pure, infinitely perfect, infinitely holy, infinitely righteous, infinitely good, infinitely everything, we suffer the consequences of our error. And that consequence is the kind of life that we live. And that is the life that is termed as sinful. Sinful because it is erroneous to the true aspect of a material sense, of an infinite universal intelligence realm of being. And that error comes with a lot of suffering in the consequences of our erroneous belief, which is suffering in sickness, diseases, sin, and the eventual death or self-annihilation of that realm that is trying to pretend to assume reality. For error can never become true. And in the process of error trying to become true, it self-annihilates. And that is exactly what we are faced with. That is the dimension that we find ourselves in. And this is the doctrine that metaphysics is about, or my metaphysics is about. And this doctrine, I believe not to be a new doctrine, but the doctrine, or the same doctrine that was brought by Jesus Christ. A doctrine that he brought and gave to his disciples for a period of 3 years, my apologies, a period of 3 years. And yet they could not comprehend it. And as I have indicated in my past videos, and as you will find in the Bible, he would ask them, until now you have not comprehended. And it is because of its complexity that we find him, even after he had ascended, as the Bible says, to the highest, in order to feel everything in every way, the infinite universal intelligence or realm. He had to come back in the spirit and pass this doctrine to one which was least expected, but one whom we are told was one of the most educated people in Rome, in the name of Saul, who became Paul, who is the father of the modern, the Gentile faith. And we see the story of how he came back from the wilderness after 3 years, and is believed to be the Arabian deserts, where he was taken by the Spirit in order to be given this doctrine. And when he comes back in 2 Peter, we find him attempting to give this doctrine to Peter and Luke. And Luke was a physician, a very educated man, yet they could not comprehend it. And Paul is saying the things that Peter is saying the things that Paul is talking about are difficult to comprehend and may be used wrongly. And it is not until then, but not before, the struggle in the book of Romans, where even himself, Paul, was trying now to live according to the doctrine that he had learned in the wilderness, by trying to do the things of the Spirit, where he says, the things I want to do, I find myself not doing. And the things I do not want to do, those I find myself doing. And we see himself actually sort of pitying himself by stating, what a wretched man I am. Who will save me from this body of death? Again, body of death, the members of the body, the five common sense, which he find has a law that wages war against the law of the spirit, the same law that he want to abide by. But then we also see that when he understands it, he starts to advise us by telling us, focus your mind on higher things, he says. And elsewhere he says, do not conform to the world, to that which is presented to your mind by the five common sense, but be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind. We also see him, I think, in the book of Ephesians, where he's telling us, awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, that the light of Christ, the light of truth, may shine upon you. And elsewhere, where he says, I think in 2 Corinthians, that for we have been given the spirit that is not of the world, but the spirit of the source, the spirit, and he says that the spirit that knows the thoughts of God. And elsewhere, I think is chapter 2, verse 16 of Corinthians, where he is advising us to take the mind that was with Jesus, the intelligence that was with Jesus. And Paul, upon conceptualizing this doctrine, and I have done a lot of research, I've written a book that I'll be releasing soon, which will be very helpful in his doctrine, whereby when he realized that Peter and Luke, who were very close to Jesus, especially Peter, could not comprehend what he was trying to tell them, he personally took this doctrine to the Gentiles. But where did he go? We see him going to Rome, in Romans. We see him going to Galatia. We see him going to Corinth. We see him going to all the towns of Greece. Why did he specifically go to those places? He went to those places because the doctrine that he had received from the Holy Spirit, the doctrine which had been brought by Jesus, tended to rhyme very well with the doctrine that he had learned prior to becoming a Christian, or a follower of the people of the way, as the Christians were known before they were christened by the Romans. And he connected and understood this doctrine to go above the threshold that the doctrine he had learned had reached. The doctrine that had been brought by Socrates in philosophy, modern philosophy, whereas we accredit Socrates as the father of modern philosophy, and we know very well that Socrates was not even a very educated person, as it goes, but he would question on reality, and he presented questions to his followers, to his audience, by asking them, what make you think that you and I are not in a dream state of mind? He questioned reality. What is reality? And none of the philosophy did not sort of unravel that, did not give a solution, did not appear to solve that problem of critical thinking. But they discussed on it, and they were making strides, but the strides were grinding to a halt until the advent of the doctrine that Paul received from the wilderness. And we see that when he went to the cities of Greece, he would stay for years in one particular city, meeting with his audience every day, similar to what Socrates had been doing at the theater of Athens and elsewhere, where he would go every morning and discuss with the sophists. So Paul would go and meet with his audience and teach them about this new doctrine. But this is a doctrine that was so difficult that the disciples of Christ did not appear to comprehend. And we see that even in the final analysis at the day of the Pentecost, the Spirit himself had to come as tongues of fire and fill each one of them, which means that what they were talking was not them but the Holy Spirit. And the miracles and the teaching that they taught even after that was not themselves. They did not comprehend his doctrine. It's only Paul, my apologies, who comprehended this doctrine and went out there and preached it. But we see him going to a point where now he realizes, he connects so strongly with this doctrine to a point he says that it no longer matters whether I am with God, or I'm in the Spirit, or I am with God or out of God, but I would rather be in God or with God and out of the body. So he got to a point where he connected spiritually, metaphysically, with the infinite universal intelligence, just like I am talking about when I'm talking of doing a sort of mental or sort of mind experiment about reconnecting, about getting to that realm. And this is what my doctrine is about. It is about enabling us to understand how we can reconnect with our intellectuality in order to tap into the infinite universal intelligence, in order for us to awaken, not as human beings, mere human beings or fraught with all forms of limitations, but as intelligence without measure, celestial beings, fearfully and wonderfully made, as Paul would say, blessed with all the blessings on high, where we are a chosen generation, a blessed nation, a people of God, a high priest in the kingdom of God, as the story goes. And this is what this metaphysics is about. So it is about awakening. It's about understanding. It's about awakening to who you and I are. It is about tapping into that latent potential power that lays dormant within each and every one of us, whereby we may be accredited as geniuses, where we find some people who have been able to utilize or to tap into that potential power, being credited as geniuses. Whereas if you're a Christian or even a religious person, you will be told that your God is not a respecter of persons. He cannot bless someone else and not bless you. He blesses us equally. Especially those of us who are Christian inclined, where the Bible says that God is not a respecter of persons, where he says that he has blessed us equally. But then the things that we see in the world are far from that fact, or appear to be far from that fact. And that tends to take us to a point where most of us, or most people, disagrees with the Bible and don't want anything to do with that God who is saying one thing in the Bible and doing a different thing in real life. Where I would want to be of the royal family, for example. I would want to be, a very wealthy person, the most wealthy person in the world. And yet here I am struggling. Where I would want to be the most intelligent person in the world. Yet here I am, I have to read countless number of times. And yet there are people out there, Albert Einstein at the age of 16, for God's sake, he is doing a thought experiment that is giving him understanding of relativity, special relativity theory that not only accredited him to get the Nobel Prize for science, but that is enabling even today, many years later, for scientists to use that same theory and be able to make discoveries that are giving them Nobel Prizes as a result. And yet, we are told that God is not a respecter of persons. So when we look at it from a material perspective, then everything appears to be a total contradiction. And that's why we see a lot of people, especially the younger generation, abandoning churches, abandoning religions, And unless we come to a point where we realize and we say, hang on, let's look at this thing again. Where did we go wrong? Where did the rain start beating us? Where, unless we come to a point where we look at things and question on whether we got it wrong somewhere or whether we have it right, then we shall be far away from truth. And more people will fall down on the wayside along the way as we are seeking our God. But it's not that God has changed. It's that the doctrine has changed. And I have shown in my videos how the doctrine that was brought by Jesus changed. Watch my videos. How the Romans were affected by the doctrine that was being preached by the disciples, including the apostles, Apostle Paul, where he was telling the believers that the same Jesus who had conquered death and ascended to the highest would come back and take his church and its followers and rule them for 1,000 years. And we know that this had implication of the Roman rule, which had been ruling the world for over 400 years. And therefore they knew that their rule, as a result, if this man comes back, then our rule is done. Our empire, the Roman Empire, is gone. So they had to do something about it. And 300 years after the spread of Christianity, we see them formalizing the doctrine, christening the religion, the people of the way, as they were called, into Christianity, forming the first church and telling people now you need to congregate once a week, contrary to what was happening, and when taking and putting everything, the letters of the disciples and all that, and the apostles, into one book, the Bible, and also suggesting that Jesus had spoken to them and told them he'll be choosing one person as a representative before he's back, all that sort of thing. And I have shown in my previous videos on the implication of this, what this meant to them and why they did what they did, and the implication of what they did as a result of that versus where we are today. We shall continue to talk about that, but in the meantime, I will continue to urge you, dear listeners, wonderful people you are, great minds, people who are blessed with all the blessings on high, with nothing denied, people who have been given power to call upon things that are not as if they were, and above all, given power to call upon the infinite universal intelligence, which is at your beck and call to help you achieve anything that you may desire to achieve. But you need to know how to do that. You need to know how to align yourself with this infinite universal intelligence of the eternal absolute being, and by so doing, then become the child of God, blessed with all the blessings on high, the highest representative of your maker, the highest representative, the highest representative, the highest manifestation, not as a physical being, but as a spiritual being, as an intelligent being, purely as an intelligent being. We shall continue to talk about this, and I know this video has been long, but it constitutes or consists of information that you will need to listen to time and again in order to understand and keep an open mind. I'm not against God, but I'm against an anthropomorphic God, a man like God. And we shall come to talk about this. We shall come to give you more insights relating to where we may have gone wrong and why things are the way they are today. In the meantime, adios, amigo. Thank you.